Tom ran toward the sleigh, but feigned tripping and fell behind the sleigh. Winston got out to assist Tom. Tom grabbed Winston's arm and held him until the goblins arrived and took him into custody. Other goblins, who used tracking blockers, took the sleigh and accompanying reindeer.
You are now listening to the transcendent sounds of
The Legendary Legend of the New Year Goblin. A Christmas Tragedy for the New Year. Part 4. Winston sat in a cell for a fortnight before the goblins had his trial. It was a sham trial. Tom, the Goblin King, had already decided Winston was guilty. He arranged his punishment before the trial even started. Winston was the only one surprised at the guilty verdict. He wasn't even clear on what the charges were, nor was he allowed to speak in his defense. Not that he would know what to say, since he was unaware of the charges against him. The Goblin King bellowed that Winston was danged to heck! The other goblins cheered and got a smidgen too rowdy in their celebration.
Take that, Winston! Meow.
Tom had been in contact with the ruler of Heck, which is in Belgium. Boobla Goblin. They arranged for Winston to be imprisoned downwind from a Waffle House. Every day, the sweet aroma of waffles wafted into Winston's prison cell. He was only allowed to eat Brussels sprouts. Within 45 days, the torture drove him mad. Upon reaching insanity, Boobla Goblin had Winston moved to the Domaine des Grottes de Han Solo, Domain of the Caves of Han Alone, which is a clandestine offshoot of the Domaine des Grottes de Han, and is home to the goblins and the fires of Heck. There, his job was to feed the fires with coal. Over time, Winston built muscle, and his soft elf skin hardened and cracked. He lived on a diet of raw pig intestine and Brussels sprouts, a goblin delicacy. An accident with the fires erased the remaining elvish from Winston's features. One morning, while performing his banal task, Winston shoveled in too much coal much too fast. Even Winston couldn't be certain it was an accident, or if he had had enough of the prison that contained his body, mind, and soul. This started out as a fun story for kids. Then it got dark. Now it's no fun for the entire family. The fires of Heck erupted back at him. Flames slashed at his face, head, neck, and shoulders. Winston tried to block them with his hands and dropped to the ground. Unlike most enemies, the goblin guards peed on Winston to put out the flames. Their acidic urine burned in Winston's burns. It was too late. From his armpits up, Winston looked like he just fought Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar. A goblin doctor performed plastic surgery to rebuild Winston's face. Unfortunately, the goblin doctor was more familiar with goblins than elves. His attempts to reconstruct Winston's nose, ears, and chin looked more goblinish than elfish. When Winston saw his reflection, his mind rebelled. He was still Winston enough that he couldn't accept his new face. He stormed out of the doctor's cave and continued out of Heck. He looked enough like a goblin that none of the real goblins thought to stop him. Winston went straight to the North Pole. His no-no training kicked in, and he stuck to the shadows and underground passages, avoiding humans. He went to Antwerp. The no-nos had an underwater dock in the Katendijdak, which hid pods large enough for 3 elves. He could take a pod to a similar underwater dock at the North Pole. No-no's underwater docks spread throughout the world. If no-no elves were taking sleighs everywhere, someone would eventually notice them flying, landing, or taking off, and mistake them for UFOs, leading to an intergalactic incident. No one wants another intergalactic incident. Even after enduring a series of traumatic events that damaged his grasp on reality, Winston's subconscious drew him home. He docked under the North Pole and ascended to Santa's workshop empire. He stumbled into the workshop. The elves working screamed and ran or hid. These elves were toy makers and no match for what they believed was a goblin assassin whose mission was to wreak havoc on the North Pole. That minuscule scare was the entirety of the havoc Winston wreaked. Winston collapsed onto a workstation, sending unfinished toys crashing to the floor. I guess that's a little more havoc Winston wreaked. In a last gasp, before passing out, he rasped out a weak, "Winston." Alfred Oregano Cotton Pepper, Winston's father, was the supervisor for that shift. As only a father can, Alfred saw through his deformations and recognized Winston, his baby boy. He ordered a few of the larger elves on duty to rush Winston to the hospital. Of course there's a hospital at the North Pole. Do you know how dangerous it is to make and test those toys you take for granted? It's mildly dangerous. Many fingers are pricked and blood is shed. The soft darts in those guns can put out an eye, or at least make it watery. They are a favorite of the toy testers. If you get a bloody toy, you know why. Don't play with the bloody ones. That's not sanitary. The doctor, Dr. Elferson, took Winston straight to the emergency room. Well, he tried to take him straight in, but the turns caused problems. Fortunately for Winston and the walls, Dr. Elferson gave up on the straight route and conformed to the hallways. Alfred was wary of having a doctor who couldn't drive a gurney caring for his son. Dr. Elferson made Winston comfortable and got him stabilized. But for a doctor who was accustomed to treating cut fingers and colds, plastic surgery was well beyond his capabilities. Winston was doomed to resemble a goblin for the rest of his life. Elves live a long time. Alfred hoped Santa could help. He was the most magical person in the North Pole, perhaps the world. As soon as Santa learned of Winston's misfortune, he rushed to Winston's side. He knew Winston was captured trying to save a child. There's nothing more likely to land one on the nice list than helping a child in need. Alfred asked if Santa could help his child in need. Facial reconstruction surgery was not in Santa's magical repertoire. Santa's magic was for chimneys and flying reindeer. The world didn't contain enough magic to repair Winston's face. Before leaving, Santa promised Alfred that Winston was always welcome at the North Pole and offered him a job. Santa asked Winston to be the head of the Naughty or Nice Observer Division. Winston's skill, determination, and knowledge were unmatched. Winston's recovery took months, but he was never himself again. Some traumas leave permanent scars. Winston had plenty of physical and mental scars. The mirror told him he was no longer Winston. The doctor confirmed that he never would be again. No Longer Winston accepted Santa's offer, with the caveat that he got to run the No-No division as he wanted, with no interference. Santa agreed. No Longer Winston no longer partook in the not creepy because of Christmas daily surveillance of children. Instead, the surveillance elves reported to No Longer Winston, who made recommendations to Santa Claus. As division head, No Longer Winston implemented immediate changes. He dwelled on Tom and the gap week between Christmas and New Year. No Longer Winston was determined to close that gap. He had the computer guys set up a program that scanned their surveillance video that week for naughty behaviors. He assigned himself the responsibility of going to the homes of the delinquent children and repossessing their fun Christmas presents. Not the socks and underwear, the imperfect cat fur-infused sweater that Grandma knitted, or the copy of Battlefield Earth Tom Cruise sends to every child in the world. If you think doing your own stunts is hard, try reading Battlefield Earth. He replaced the fun gifts with fresh piles of stinky steaming elf and goblin poop. He was no longer Winston. Winston was dead. Long live the New Year Goblin. The end.
Oh, Charlie, Charlie.
It's the Chicka Chicka Chuck, y'all. The chicka-chuck, y'all. The chickity-chickity-chickity-chuck, y'all. Delightful.
Delightful.
If I catch you on Candy Lane, I'll stab you with my candy cane.